Grace did not see Eli again for almost 40 minutes, but his presence stayed with her like the scent of rain trapped in wool. The ballroom swallowed her whole the moment she stepped through the service doors. Crystal chandeliers burned overhead. A string quartet played near the far windows. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed with women in silk gowns while servers moved between them like shadows trained not to exist. Grace balanced her tray, smiled when she was supposed to smile, stepped back when someone reached past her without looking, and kept her cracked name tag tucked in her vest pocket where Vanessa could not see it. Every few minutes, her fingers brushed the broken plastic, and she heard Eli's quiet voice again. "Does not look broken to me." It was a ridiculous thing to remember. He was a maintenance worker, a stranger, maybe not even a real one, if Vanessa was right. But kindness had a way of echoing when a person heard so little of it. Near the front of the ballroom, Vanessa glided from table to table, checking flower arrangements, whispering into her headset, smiling at donors as if she had personally invented generosity. The Whitmore Grand Hotel Charity Gala was her favorite kind of battlefield. Expensive, crowded, and full of people who believed a six-figure donation made them immune to basic manners. Grace had worked enough events to understand the rules. Do not correct the guests. Do not react when they mispronounce your name. Do not let anyone see you hungry. Do not remind them that the people pouring their champagne are people too. "Miss," a man at table 12 said, snapping his fingers without turning his head. Grace stepped closer. "Yes, sir." "Not this one," he said, pushing a glass toward her. "The other champagne. The one they were pouring at the senator's table." Grace glanced at the bottle on her tray. It was the same label, the same year, the same everything. "Of course," she said softly. She crossed the room, waited 10 seconds near the bar, then returned with a fresh glass from the same bottle. The man sipped it and nodded, satisfied. "Better." Grace smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a rent-is-due smile. A keep-your-job smile. Hey, my mother survived worse than this smile. Her mother, Diane Bennett, had spent 18 years on the housekeeping staff at Whitmore Grand. She used to come home after midnight with swollen feet, smelling faintly of bleach and lavender lotion, and still ask Grace about school before taking off her shoes. "Listen to me, baby girl," Diane would say, pressing 2 tired fingers beneath Grace's chin. "A fancy room does not make a person bigger than you, and a hard life does not make you smaller." Grace had believed that as a child. It was harder at 27, with overdue bills folded in her kitchen drawer and a landlord who no longer sounded patient on voicemail. The apartment on Fulton Street was only 600 square feet, with a radiator that clanged all winter and a kitchen window that stuck in July, but it was home. It was where her mother had danced to old soul songs while stirring tomato soup. It was where Grace still kept Diane's blue mug beside the sink, even though no one had used it in 3 years. Losing that apartment felt like losing her mother twice. "Grace." Vanessa's voice came through Grace's thoughts like a blade wrapped in velvet. Grace turned. "Yes, Miss Clark." Vanessa stood near the service station, her tablet pressed to her chest, eyes fixed on the tray. "Table 6 says their hors d'oeuvres arrived cold. I took them out as soon as the kitchen called," Grace said. "Then perhaps you walked too slowly." Grace held her breath. Around them, 2 other servers became intensely interested in napkins and silverware. "I can replace them," Grace said. "You will, and you will do it with a smile. Mr. Langford is on the hotel advisory board, and if he is unhappy, I am unhappy. Do you understand how this works?" "Yes, ma'am." Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Also, your name tag is missing. Staff presentation matters. This is not a diner." Grace's hand moved toward her pocket before she could stop it. "The pin broke. I will fix it before the end of the shift." "You will fix it now?" "I do not have another pin." Vanessa's eyes flicked over her uniform, her worn shoes, the small fray at one cuff. "Then improvise. That is what people in your position are supposed to be good at." She walked away before Grace could answer. For a moment, Grace stood still, feeling the quiet sting of those words settle under her skin. People in your position. It was always that phrase, or one like it. People like you. Girls like you. Staff like you. As if poverty were not a circumstance, but a stain. She slipped into the back corridor, away from the music, away from the glitter, and leaned against the wall beside a stack of linen carts. The service hallway was cooler than the ballroom. Fluorescent lights hummed above her. Somewhere behind the wall, pipes clicked and sighed. Grace pulled the cracked name tag from her pocket. The corner had split. The pin was bent beyond saving. She pressed her thumb over her own name, fighting the sudden burn in her eyes. She was not going to cry at work. She had made that rule years ago. Crying made people either uncomfortable or powerful, and she was not interested in giving Vanessa either gift. Need a hand. Grace looked up so fast, she almost dropped the tag. Eli stood 10 feet away, now dry enough that his hair had settled neatly around his forehead, though his gray jacket still looked too old for the building around him. The broken toolbox hung at his side. A folded ladder leaned against the wall behind him, and a panel near the ceiling stood open, wires tucked inside like veins. You keep appearing in restricted areas, Grace said, trying to sound amused instead of relieved. I could say the same about you. I work here. So do I, apparently. She glanced at the open panel. Did they at least let you fix whatever emergency you supposedly caused by existing? His mouth curved slightly. Not yet. I am still trying to understand the wiring. Grace looked down at the name tag in her hand. Good luck. Everything in this place looks polished until you get behind the walls. Eli's eyes held hers for a second too long. That is usually where the real problems are. The sentence landed strangely, heavier than it should have. Grace looked away first. It is just a broken pin. May I? He asked. She hesitated, then handed him the tag. He set the toolbox on a linen cart and opened it. Inside were a few ordinary tools, but they were arranged with unusual precision, each one clean, each one exactly where it belonged. He pulled out a small strip of silver tape and a narrow clip, working with steady hands. You are good at that, Grace said. Fixing small things. Making broken things look less broken. He paused, then looked at her. Maybe they do not need to look less broken. Maybe someone just needs to stop stepping on them. Grace tried to laugh, but it came out softer than she intended. You talk like that to everyone, Eli. Only people who hand towels to strangers. A faint warmth moved through her chest. She watched him attach the clip to the back of the tag. His sleeve shifted, and she saw it again, a pale line at his wrist where an expensive watch might have been. Not a cheap one. Not the kind maintenance workers wore, because they might get scratched behind a wall. You sure you are maintenance? She asked. Eli did not look up. Why? You know the building too well. You speak like you read contracts for fun, and your hands are not afraid of tools, but they are not exactly used to them either. This time he did smile, small and controlled. Most powerful things in a hotel are hidden behind walls. Grace raised an eyebrow. That sounds like something from a motivational poster in a manager's office. Does that make it less true? No, she admitted. Just suspicious. He handed back the repaired name tag. The silver clip held firm. Not perfect, but stronger than before. Grace stared at it longer than she meant to. Her name looked different in her palm. Not new. Not expensive. Just seen. Thank you, she said quietly. You did not have to do that. Neither did you. The ballroom doors opened down the hall, and music rushed out with a burst of laughter. A server called Grace's name, panic in her voice. Vanessa was asking for her. Grace clipped the tag back onto her vest and straightened her shoulders. That means trouble. Eli picked up his toolbox. Does trouble usually ask for you by name? Grace gave him a tired smile. In this hotel, trouble signs my paycheck. She started toward the ballroom, then stopped and glanced back. Eli was watching her with that same unreadable calm, but there was something else now, something almost like concern. Grace, he said. She turned. Do not let them convince you that this place is bigger than you are. For a second, the hallway, the gala, the overdue rent, Vanessa's voice, all of it went quiet. Grace wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe anyone could walk into a place like Whitmore Grand and not shrink. Instead, she touched the repaired name tag and said, easy to say when you can leave. Then she pushed through the ballroom doors, back into the light, not knowing the man behind her could have owned every chandelier above her head with a single signature. The moment Grace stepped back into the ballroom, the air changed. Not loudly, not enough for the donors to notice. But workers noticed everything. The way Vanessa stood too still near the floral arch. The way the head bartender avoided Grace's eyes. The way two servers suddenly stopped speaking when she passed. Grace felt it before anyone said a word. Trouble had found her, and this time it was wearing a velvet dress and a polite smile. There you are, Vanessa said, crossing the room with controlled steps. Table 6 has been waiting. Grace looked toward table 6, where Mr. Langford sat with a group of investors, his silver hair combed back, his tuxedo jacket open, one hand resting on the back of his chair like he owned the building by leaning on it. Maybe he did. Men like him always seemed to own pieces of places where women like Grace cleaned up after them. "I am sorry for the delay," Grace said. "I was fixing my name tag." Vanessa's eyes dropped to the tag, now clipped firmly to Grace's vest. For a second, irritation flickered across her face. How resourceful. It did not sound like praise. Grace moved toward the kitchen, but Vanessa caught her by the elbow, not hard, just enough to remind her who could write the schedule next week. "Mr. Langford is important. He says his appetizers were cold. He also says you were dismissive." Grace blinked. "I was not dismissive. That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" Vanessa's smile thinned. "The point is that if he feels disrespected, then he was disrespected. Guests define the experience. Staff correct themselves." Grace looked past her, through the open service doors, toward the hallway where Eli had been standing minutes earlier. Empty now? Of course. People could say brave things in quiet corridors. The ballroom was different. The ballroom had witnesses, money, consequences. Grace breathed in through her nose and nodded. "I will apologize." "Good girl," Vanessa said. The words landed like a slap without a hand. Grace's fingers tightened around the tray. She was 27 years old. She paid taxes. She worked double shifts. She had signed her mother's hospital papers alone. But in that ballroom, under all that crystal light, Vanessa could reduce her to a child with 2 words and a smile. Grace walked to table 6 anyway. Mr. Langford looked up slowly, as if she had interrupted something more valuable than her dignity. Finally, he said, "Sir," Grace said, voice steady, "I am sorry your appetizers were not to your satisfaction. I would be happy to bring fresh ones." He looked at the tray, then at her name tag. "Grace. That is sweet." A few people at the table chuckled softly, not because it was funny, but because rich men taught rooms when to laugh. "Tell me, Grace, do they train you people to argue with guests now?" She held the tray with both hands. "No, sir. I was not arguing. You were not listening either." He leaned back. "There is a difference between service and presence. Service means I should not have to notice you unless I need something." The words made her stomach twist, but her face did not change. She had learned that from her mother too. Never give cruel people the satisfaction of watching the bruise form. "I understand," she said. "Do you?" Mr. Langford reached for a champagne flute from her tray, then paused. His eyes shifted over her shoulder. "And who is that?" Grace turned. Eli had entered through the side service door carrying a coil of cable and a small tool case. He moved quietly, staying near the wall, but he did not look lost. That was what unsettled Grace. He looked like a man walking through a room he had already memorized. Vanessa spotted him at the same time and stiffened. "Absolutely not," she muttered. Mr. Langford gave a dry laugh. "Is that maintenance?" During the gala, Eli stopped near a brass wall panel not far from table 6 and opened it with a small key. Grace watched Vanessa's face shift from annoyance to alarm. "He is handling an electrical issue," Grace said before she could stop herself. Mr. Langford lifted his glass. "Then he can handle it after dinner." Eli looked over, calm as ever. "If I handle it after dinner, the uplighting may fail during the donor presentation." His tone was respectful, but there was a quiet authority underneath it, the kind that did not ask permission to be true. Mr. Langford stared at him. "And who exactly are you?" "Eli," he said. "Temporary maintenance." The table laughed. Vanessa stepped in quickly. "Mr. Langford, I apologize. He should not be visible to guests." Eli's eyes moved to Grace for half a second. She could not read them. "Visible," Mr. Langford repeated, amused. "That is generous." Vanessa gave Eli a sharp look. "Use the lower corridor." "The lower corridor panel is locked from the banquet side," Eli said. "Then get a key." "This is the key." He held it up, and the tiny brass tag hanging from it caught the light. Grace noticed Vanessa notice it. Her expression changed again, just a fraction. Not fear. Not yet. Confusion. "Where did you get that?" Vanessa asked. Eli closed the panel carefully. "From someone who wanted the problem fixed." Mr. Langford set down his glass. "This is absurd. I did not donate $250,000 to watch a handyman crawl around the walls." A few people at nearby tables turned. Grace felt the room tightening. Vanessa's eyes flashed at her, a warning to stay silent. Eli lowered the coil of cable. I will be finished in 2 minutes. You will be finished now, Mr. Langford said. His voice was still polite, but the table had gone quiet enough that every word carried. And you can start by apologizing for interrupting our evening. Eli stood still, not defiant, not submissive, just still. If my work has disturbed you, I apologize. Mr. Langford smiled. That is not an apology. Look at my shoes. Grace looked down before she meant to. One of Mr. Langford's polished black shoes had a small splash of champagne near the toe, probably from his own glass. You tracked rain and whatever else across this floor, he said to Eli. Clean it. The room went silent in that terrible way rooms do when everyone knows something wrong is happening, but no one wants to be the first to name it. Vanessa looked away. The bartender froze behind the portable bar. Eli glanced at the shoe, then at the towel tucked into his tool case. His face revealed nothing, but Grace saw the smallest movement in his jaw. He was going to do it. Not because he was weak. Because people like him, or people pretending to be like him, knew that survival sometimes looked like swallowing insult after insult until the shift ended. Something inside Grace snapped quietly. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a thread pulled too far. She stepped between them and set her tray on the nearest service stand. Sir, she said, her voice clear enough that 2 nearby tables turned fully toward her. Money can buy this room for an evening. It can buy the flowers, the music, the champagne, and the name printed on the program. But it cannot buy the right to humiliate a man. Mr. Langford's smile disappeared. Vanessa went pale with anger. Grace, she hissed. Grace's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she did not move. If there is a spill, I will call housekeeping. If there is an electrical issue, he should be allowed to fix it. But no one here should be asked to kneel for another person's comfort. The silence stretched. Somewhere near the stage, the quartet missed a note and recovered. Eli stared at Grace, and for the first time since she met him, his calm cracked. Not much. Just enough for something like awe to show through. Mr. Langford rose slowly from his chair. He was not yelling. That almost made it worse. Ms. Clark, he said, eyes still on Grace. Is this how your staff speaks to donors? Vanessa stepped forward quickly. Of course not. Grace will be removed from the floor immediately. Grace's pulse dropped cold. Removed from the floor meant written up. Written up meant fewer shifts. Fewer shifts meant Fulton Street. Slipping away 1 unpaid week at a time. Vanessa turned to her with a smile that promised punishment later. Back hallway. Now. Grace picked up her tray with hands that wanted to shake and forced them not to. She did not look at Eli as she walked away. She could not. If she saw gratitude in his eyes, she might cry. If she saw pity, she might break. The service doors swung shut behind her, muting the ballroom into a distant golden hum. Vanessa followed, her heels striking the floor like a countdown. Do you have any idea what you just did? She whispered. Grace faced her, still holding the tray. I told the truth. No, Vanessa said. You forgot your place. Grace's repaired name tag caught the hallway light. For one brief second, she thought of Eli's words. Maybe someone just needs to stop stepping on them. She lifted her chin. Maybe I finally remembered it. Vanessa's smile vanished completely. Enjoy the rest of your last good night here, Grace. Then she turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Grace alone beside the linen carts, surrounded by polished walls, humming pipes, and the terrible knowledge that doing the right thing had just cost her everything. Grace spent the next hour working like a woman trying to outrun a storm that had already learned her name. Vanessa did not send her home. That would have been too merciful and too obvious. Instead, she kept Grace on the floor, smiling in front of donors, refilling glasses, replacing plates, carrying silver trays until her wrists ached. Punishment at Whitmore Grand did not always look like being dismissed. Sometimes it looked like being forced to keep serving the people who had watched you be diminished and chosen their dessert forks instead. Grace moved through the ballroom with her shoulders straight and her face calm, but inside, every sound felt sharper. The clink of glass, the soft rush of expensive fabric, the polite laughter rising from table 6, where Mr. Langford was already telling the story like it had amused him. She could feel Vanessa watching from across the room, waiting for her to stumble, waiting for one cracked glass, one wrong order, one visible tear. Grace gave her none of it. Her mother had once said dignity was not something rich people handed down like a tip. It was something you carried in your chest, even when your hands were full. So Grace carried it. She carried champagne to the mayor's wife. She carried lemon water to a retired judge. She carried a tray of tiny crab cakes past Mr. Langford without looking at his shoes. But each step made Fulton Street feel farther away. Fewer shifts meant fewer dollars. Fewer dollars meant the landlord changing the locks. She imagined packing her mother's blue mug and newspaper, folding the old quilt from the couch, leaving behind the window where rain had sounded like applause when she was little. That was the worst part. Not losing walls. Losing proof that her mother had existed in them. Near 11 o'clock, the gala loosened. Speeches ended. Donors drifted toward the silent auction tables. The ballroom lights softened into a honey-colored glow. Grace slipped into the back stairwell with a tray of used glasses, needing 10 seconds away from everyone's perfume and power. She set the tray on the landing and pressed one hand to the cool railing. Below her, the hotel hummed. Above her, somewhere behind the walls, a pipe clicked. She closed her eyes. You should sit down. Grace opened them. Eli stood halfway down the stairs, one hand on the rail, toolbox at his feet. The white towel she had given him was folded over his arm, now dry. For a strange second, he looked less like maintenance and more like a man who had been waiting for the world to empty so he could speak honestly. You again, she said, but there was no bite in it. You keep finding me in places where I am trying not to fall apart. Are you? No, he looked at her. She looked away. Maybe a little. Eli climbed the last few steps slowly, as if careful not to crowd her. What you did in there was brave. Grace gave a tired laugh. Brave is a nice word people use when consequences are not landing on their paycheck. He was wrong. That does not pay rent. The words came out sharper than she meant. She sighed and rubbed her forehead. I am sorry. You did not deserve that. Neither did you. For a moment, the stairwell held only the distant music from the ballroom. Grace picked up one of the glasses on the tray, noticed a lipstick mark along the rim, and put it back down. You know what is funny? I keep thinking about my mother. She cleaned rooms here for 18 years. She used to say this hotel had two faces. One for the guests, one for the people who made it shine. Which face did she know? Eli asked. The tired one. Grace smiled faintly. She knew every service hallway, every closet with a broken shelf, every manager who pretended not to know when housekeepers worked through lunch. But she still loved beautiful things. She would come home and describe the flower arrangements like she had been to a museum. She would say, Grace, beauty is not the enemy. Cruelty is. Eli listened without interrupting. Most people waited for their turn to speak. He did not. It made Grace say more than she intended. After she got sick, the bills came fast. I was 24. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could keep everything from falling apart. The apartment, her treatments, her dignity, mine. She swallowed. I kept the apartment after she passed because it still felt like she might walk in with grocery bags and ask why I had not eaten dinner. Stupid, right? No, Eli said. Not stupid. His voice was so quiet that it nearly disappeared under the music. Grace studied him. What about you? Me? Yes. You talk like a man with secrets. Everyone has a reason for being in a place like this at 11 o'clock at night. Eli looked down at the towel on his arm. His thumb moved over the corner, where a small embroidered letter had caught against the fold. Grace saw it clearly this time. A white W stitched in silver thread. Her eyes narrowed. That is a fancy towel for maintenance. He followed her gaze and went still. Just 1 second. But Grace caught it. It was in the service card, he said. No, it was not. Service towels are plain. That one looks like it belongs in a penthouse bathroom. He did not answer quickly enough. Grace felt the strange suspicion from earlier return. The key. The way Vanessa had reacted. The way he spoke about the hotel like he had studied more than blueprints. Who? Are you Eli? She asked. The name suddenly felt too small for him. He met her eyes. Something in his face shifted, as if he had walked to the edge of a truth and stopped himself from stepping over. Someone trying to understand what is broken. In the wiring? Among other things. Grace let out a breath. That is not an answer. No, he admitted. It is not. She should have pushed harder. Any sensible woman would have. But the stairwell door opened below them, and 2 kitchen staff came through laughing softly, carrying empty crates. The moment broke. Grace lifted the tray again. Eli reached for it. Let me. I can carry glasses. I know you can. He still took the tray, not from assumption, but with permission in his eyes. She let him, just this once. They walked down the service corridor together, past laundry bins and stacked chairs, away from the ballroom's golden noise. At the staff break area, someone had left a plate of untouched sandwiches from the donor lounge. Grace looked at them, then looked away. Eli noticed. Of course he noticed. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "I had coffee around noon." "That is not eating. It counts if you are busy enough." He set the tray down and picked up a wrapped turkey sandwich, handing it to her without ceremony. "Then be less busy for 3 minutes." Grace hesitated, then took it. Hunger made her pride quieter. They sat on opposite ends of a narrow bench near the vending machines, eating in the half-light while the hotel breathed around them. For the first time all night, Grace allowed herself to rest. Eli did not fill the silence with empty comfort. He simply sat there, rain-dried jacket creased at the elbows, expensive towel folded beside him, eyes fixed on nothing and everything. "Do rich people know how lonely they look?" Grace asked suddenly. Eli turned to her. "What do you mean?" She nodded toward the ballroom. "All of them in there. They laugh too loud. They check who is watching before they smile. They talk about legacy like they are afraid nobody will remember them unless their name is carved into marble." She took a small bite of the sandwich. "Sometimes I think they are just lonely people pretending they bought happiness." Eli looked down at his hands. The sentence had found something in him. Grace saw it before he hit it. "Maybe some of them did buy everything except that," he said. "Maybe," she replied. "But that still does not give them the right to treat people like furniture." "No," he said. "It does not." From the hallway, Vanessa's voice called sharply, "Grace Bennett." Grace stood at once, the sandwich still in her hand. Her small moment of peace vanished. Vanessa appeared at the end of the corridor, her smile bright and dangerous. "There you are. I need you in the ballroom. Now." Grace glanced at Eli. He stood too, and something cold moved behind his eyes, not anger exactly, but decision. Vanessa's gaze landed on him, then on the white towel, then on the two of them sitting together. Her mouth tightened. "And you," she said to Eli, "should remember temporary workers are not paid to socialize." Grace stepped forward before he could answer. "I was on break. Your break ended when I needed you." Vanessa turned and walked away, expecting obedience. Grace followed, because rent still existed, because grief still had an address, because courage did not erase consequences. But as she reached the ballroom doors, she looked back once. Eli had not moved. He stood alone beneath the fluorescent light, the repaired name tag glinting on her vest, the silver W on the towel visible in his hand. For the first time, Grace saw not a maintenance worker, not a stranger, not a man hiding from the rain, but someone weighing how much longer he could let a rotten place reveal itself before he tore the mask away. Vanessa led Grace back into the ballroom with the bright, polished smile of a woman carrying a knife no one else could see. The donor gala had shifted into its final hour, the dangerous hour, when people were full of champagne and confidence, when compliments became louder, secrets slipped easier, and staff were expected to become even more invisible. Grace tucked the half-eaten sandwich into the pocket of her apron before anyone could notice. Her stomach still ached with hunger, but at least the shaking in her hands had stopped. Vanessa handed her a fresh tray of dessert plates, each one holding a square of chocolate cake, so small it looked like a sample from a dream. "You will serve the east side tables," Vanessa said. "You will smile. You will not speak unless spoken to. And you will stay away from Mr. Langford." Grace glanced toward table 6. Mr. Langford was no longer seated. He stood near the silent auction display, laughing with a woman in emerald silk and 2 men Grace recognized from hotel brochures. Board members, probably. The kind of people whose signatures moved money from one tower to another while the workers below prayed the elevators kept running. "I understand," Grace said. Vanessa leaned closer. "No, Grace, I do not think you do. You have confused basic employment with personal importance. This hotel does not need your opinions. It needs your hands." Grace felt the words hit, but she kept her face still. "My hands are working. Then make sure they are all I notice." Vanessa turned away, already smiling at a donor before Grace could answer. Grace moved through the room slowly, placing desserts in front of guests who barely looked up. "Chocolate torte," she said softly. "Raspberry glaze." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, like it belonged to someone trained to survive by becoming pleasant. But her mind was still in the service corridor, replaying the silver W on the towel, Eli's careful silence, the way he had looked when she asked who he was. Someone trying to understand what is broken. Nobody said things like that unless they were hiding behind more than a job title. Near the auction tables, a woman laughed too loudly and lifted a diamond bracelet from a velvet display cushion, holding it against her wrist. Grace noticed because the bracelet flashed under the chandelier like frozen fire. It was part of the charity auction, a donated piece called the Langford Diamond Cuff, valued at $75,000. There was a small white card beside it, printed with words like legacy and generosity. Grace had placed cocktail napkins near that very table an hour earlier. A hotel guard stood at the far end of the display, distracted by a guest asking directions to the powder room. Vanessa was near the stage, speaking into her headset. For once, nobody was watching the bracelet. Nobody except Grace. And someone else. Mr. Langford's companion, the woman in emerald silk, set the bracelet down after admiring it, but not on the cushion. It slid partly beneath a folded program. Grace saw it. She opened her mouth to say something, but a guest at table 9 touched her arm. "Sweetheart, coffee?" Grace looked away for 3 seconds. Only 3. When she turned back, Vanessa was at the auction table, her face suddenly pale, her hand pressed to her headset. The cushion was empty. The folded program had been moved. The bracelet was gone. The music seemed to shrink. Vanessa's voice cut through the ballroom, calm but sharp. "Security, please come to the auction display." Conversation softened, then thinned. The guard hurried over. Mr. Langford turned, his pleasant expression fading into annoyance. "What is happening?" Vanessa looked around the room, and Grace knew before Vanessa's eyes found her. She knew with the awful certainty of someone who had spent years being the easiest person to blame. Vanessa's gaze locked onto the dessert tray in Grace's hands. "Grace," she said. Not loud. Loud would have been less frightening. "Come here." Grace's heart dropped. She set the tray on a nearby stand and walked over. Guests parted for her, curious now, hungry in a different way. Nothing entertained wealth like the possibility of someone beneath them being exposed. Vanessa pointed to the velvet cushion. "The diamond cuff is missing." Grace nodded slowly. "I saw Mrs. Harper holding it earlier." She put it down near the programs. The woman in emerald silk blinked, offended. "Are you accusing me?" "No, ma'am," Grace said quickly. "I only mean I saw it there a minute ago." Mr. Langford's face hardened. "Careful." Vanessa stepped closer. Grace was near this table several times tonight. Grace felt every eye on her uniform, her worn shoes, her repaired name tag. So were many people. And Grace, Vanessa continued, has already shown difficulty understanding boundaries this evening. The sentence curled around the room like smoke. Grace stared at her. "That is not fair." "Fair," Vanessa repeated softly. "A $75,000 bracelet has disappeared during a charity gala, and you want to discuss fair?" The guard shifted, embarrassed but obedient. "Ms. Bennett, we may need to check your apron pockets." The ballroom went silent. Grace's face burned. "You cannot be serious." Vanessa lowered her voice, but not enough. "If you have nothing to hide, this will be quick." Grace looked around for Eli. She hated herself for it, but she looked. The side doors, the service corridor, the wall panel. He was not there. Of course he was not there. Men like him, whatever he was, appeared in stairwells with gentle words and disappeared when the powerful arrived with consequences. Grace slowly untied her apron. Her fingers did not shake now. They had gone cold. She handed it to the guard. He checked one pocket and found order slips. He checked another and found a pen, 2 wrapped mints, and the sandwich she had not finished. A few people murmured. Vanessa's mouth twitched, almost satisfied. Then the guard reached the last pocket and paused. Grace saw his expression change before he pulled anything out. A flash of white velvet. A silver clasp. A hard glitter of diamonds beneath the chandelier. The bracelet lay in his palm like a verdict. For 1 second, Grace could not breathe. "No," she whispered. It was the only word she had. Not because she was guilty, because she understood too late how neatly the trap had been built. Vanessa placed one hand over her chest, performing shock for the room. "Grace, I did not put that there." Her voice cracked, and she hated that too. "I swear I did not." Mr. Langford exhaled through his nose. Unbelievable. The woman in emerald silk turned away as if Grace had become unpleasant to look at. The guard held the bracelet awkwardly, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice soft enough to sound kind to anyone not listening carefully. The best thing you can do now is apologize. We can handle this discreetly if you cooperate. Apologize for something I did not do. Grace asked. Apologize for embarrassing the hotel. There it was. Not the truth. Not the bracelet. The hotel. Grace looked at the polished floor, at her reflection broken into pieces by the shine. Her name tag glinted on her vest, the clip Eli had fixed holding firm. She thought of her mother bent over beds in upstairs suites, smoothing sheets for people who would never know her name. She thought of Fulton Street, the blue mug, the lavender soap. She thought of every time silence had been sold to her as survival. Vanessa touched her arm lightly. Grace, kneel down, say you are sorry, and perhaps Mr. Langford will show mercy. The word kneel moved through the room like a quiet order. Grace lifted her head. Her eyes stung, but no tears fell. I will not kneel for a lie. Vanessa's smile vanished. Mr. Langford stepped forward. Then you leave us no choice. The guard looked toward the ballroom doors, signaling for another security officer. Grace stood alone under the chandeliers, accused, surrounded, poorer than everyone in the room, and somehow still expected to surrender the last thing she owned, her dignity. Then, from the far end of the ballroom, the main doors opened. Not the service doors. The main doors. The music faltered. Conversations died one by one. Grace did not turn at first. She only felt the room change, felt the air tighten, felt powerful people straighten, as if someone had pulled invisible strings through their spines. Then she heard footsteps across the marble. Slow. Measured. Certain. Vanessa's face drained of color. Mr. Langford's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Grace finally turned, and the breath left her body. Eli was walking toward her, but he was no longer wearing the gray work jacket. He wore a black tuxedo cut perfectly to his frame, his rain-dark hair brushed back, silver cuff links catching the chandelier light, a white pocket square folded with impossible precision. The same calm eyes. The same steady hands. A different world wrapped around him like it had been waiting. The hotel general manager stood so fast his chair struck the table behind him. 2 board members rose. Then another. Then another. Around the ballroom, people who had not seen Grace all night suddenly lowered their heads toward the man they had all mistaken for nobody. Vanessa took one step back. The master of ceremonies lifted the microphone with a trembling hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice thin with panic. Mr. Ethan Whitmore, owner and chief executive officer of Whitmore Grand Hotels. Grace stared at him, unable to move, unable to speak, while the man who had fixed her broken name tag stopped beside her and looked at the bracelet in the guard's hand. His voice was quiet, but it carried through every inch of the ballroom. Nobody touches her dignity again. Ethan Whitmore did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had already surrendered to the weight of his name. A minute earlier, the ballroom had belonged to donors, board members, polished smiles, and whispered judgments. Now every chandelier, every table, every nervous breath seemed to bend toward the man standing beside Grace. The same man she had handed a towel to in the rain. The same man who had sat with her near the vending machines while she ate half a turkey sandwich like it was dinner. The same man who had lied by omission every time she asked who he was. Grace could not decide which feeling came first. Shock, relief, anger, or the terrible humiliation of realizing she had spoken her heart to the owner of the building where she could barely afford to be invisible. The guard still held the diamond bracelet in his open palm. His face had gone gray. Mr. Whitmore, he said, voice low. I did not know. Ethan looked at him, not cruelly, but with a steadiness that made excuses unnecessary. You did not know she was innocent, or you did not know I was watching. The guard lowered his eyes. No answer. Mr. Langford cleared his throat, trying to recover the old shape of the room. Ethan, this is an unfortunate situation, but surely we can handle it privately. Ethan turned toward him. For the first time, Grace saw what everyone else had seen the moment he entered. Not wealth, not style, not even power exactly, but command. Quiet, controlled, and immovable. You addressed me as if we were equals when you thought I was useful, Ethan said. You addressed my employee as if she were beneath you when you thought she had no protection. That tells me everything I need to know about how you define private. Mr. Langford's face tightened. Careful. A soft murmur passed through the room. Vanessa stood near the auction display, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Ethan did not look away from Langford. No. You be careful. This hotel has carried your name on programs, donor walls, and advisory letters for 12 years. Tonight, I watched you treat a working woman's dignity like a floor mat. Langford glanced around, noticing how many phones had been lowered but not put away. This is not the place. It became the place when you allowed a public accusation. Ethan shifted his gaze to Vanessa. And when my event manager encouraged a public apology for a lie, Vanessa's lips parted. Mr. Whitmore, I was only trying to protect the hotel. From what? Ethan asked. The truth. Grace stood frozen beside him. The bracelet sparkled under the lights. Her apron lay in the guard's hand. Her name tag still held to her vest by the clip Ethan had made. Every detail felt too clear, too bright, too unbearable. She should have felt rescued. Instead, she felt exposed in a whole new way. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and removed a slim black phone. For the past 6 weeks, I have been reviewing complaints from housekeeping, banquet staff, kitchen runners, and security. Missing tips. Retaliation after reports. Staff hours edited after midnight. Donor misconduct buried under phrases like guest experience. I came here tonight under a temporary maintenance badge because the reports all had one thing in common. His eyes moved across the ballroom. Nobody told the truth when power was in the room. Vanessa's face changed, not dramatically, but enough. A small loss of color. A fast breath. Ethan tapped his phone once. The large screen above the stage, moments ago displaying charity totals, flickered to life. A security clip appeared, grainy but clear. The auction table. The woman in emerald silk placing the bracelet partly under a folded program. Grace turning away to answer a guest. Vanessa stepping into frame, looking left, then right. Vanessa lifting the bracelet with 2 fingers, hiding it beneath her tablet, and walking toward the service station. A second clip followed. Vanessa near the dessert stand, slipping the bracelet into Grace's apron pocket while Grace served coffee with her back turned. The ballroom went silent in a way Grace had never heard before. Not polite silence. Not wealthy silence. A silence with fear in it. Vanessa stared at the screen as if it had betrayed her personally. That is taken out of context, she said, but even she seemed to hear how thin the words sounded. Ethan's expression did not change. There is more context if you would like it. Payroll edits. Tip diversions. Written complaints marked resolved without interviews. 3 staff members transferred after reporting Mr. Langford's behavior at previous events. Mr. Langford's jaw worked once, then stopped. Grace looked at Vanessa, waiting for denial, outrage, anything. But Vanessa only looked at Ethan with a desperate brightness. I kept this place running. You have no idea what it takes to manage people who complain about every little thing. People, Ethan said. Not problems. Not positions. People. The word echoed strangely in Grace's chest. He had heard her. From the first night, from the rain, from the hallway. He had heard everything. Ethan turned to the general manager, who stood stiffly near the stage. Ms. Clark is relieved of her duties effective immediately. Her access credentials are suspended. Human Resources and Legal will conduct a full review beginning tonight. Every employee affected by withheld tips or edited hours will be repaid with interest. The general manager nodded quickly. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. And Mr. Langford, Ethan continued, facing him again, your advisory role ends tonight. The hotel will return your donation from this evening and remove your name from all future Whitmore staff programs. A ripple moved through the room. Returning money was not something rooms like this understood. Money was supposed to clean everything. Ethan had just refused to let it. Langford's face hardened with embarrassment. You will regret this. Ethan stepped closer, his voice still calm. I regret letting people like you feel comfortable here. Grace's throat tightened. Around them, the staff stood motionless at the edges of the ballroom, some with trays still in hand, some with wet eyes, some staring as if they were seeing the hotel for the first time. Vanessa was escorted away by 2 senior staff members, not roughly, not dramatically, just firmly enough to make it clear the room no longer belonged to her. As she passed Grace, Vanessa did not look at her. That almost made it worse. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the vanishing of a woman who had caused pain and expected the floor to absorb it. Ethan took the bracelet from the guard and placed it back on the velvet cushion. Then he turned to Grace. The whole room watched. Maybe he forgot how that would feel to her. Maybe powerful men were so used to witnesses they forgot silence could become another kind of cage. "Grace," he said softly, "I am sorry." The words were real. She heard that. But all she could see was Eli in the stairwell, Eli in the service corridor, Eli asking questions while knowing he owned the answers. She stepped back. His face changed, just slightly. "Grace." She looked at him, and the anger finally found its way through the shock. Not loud, not messy, clean enough to hurt. "How many times did you watch me get hurt before you decided I was worth saving?" The ballroom seemed to disappear. Ethan went still. The question reached him in a place no boardroom ever had. "That is not what happened," he said, but his voice lacked certainty. "Is it not?" Grace asked. "You watched Vanessa talk down to me. You watched Langford humiliate you, and then me. You watched me get accused. You let me think I was alone. I needed proof. I needed honesty." The words struck harder than any accusation. Ethan looked at her repaired name tag, then back to her eyes. "You are right." The admission came quietly. No defense wrapped around it. No explanation trying to turn pain into strategy. Just truth. Grace wished that made it easier. It did not. Her heart was still pounding. Her job was saved, maybe. Her dignity had been defended, yes. But trust, once bent, did not straighten because a rich man finally told the truth under chandeliers. She untied the apron from the guard's hand and folded it herself. Then she placed it on the nearest table. "I am grateful you cleared my name," she said. "But I do not know you." Ethan took that like a man who had expected applause and received a mirror. "Grace, please let me explain." She shook her head. "Not here. Not with all of them watching." She touched the name tag on her vest one last time, then unclipped it and set it beside the apron. The small plastic badge made almost no sound when it met the table, but Ethan flinched as if it had. Grace walked toward the service doors. No one stopped her. No one dared. The staff parted quietly, and for once, their eyes did not look through her. They saw her. At the door, she paused but did not turn around. "Power does not impress me, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "What people do with it does." Then she stepped into the back corridor, leaving behind the ballroom, the diamonds, the bowed heads, and the man who had won the entire room only to understand that the one person who mattered had just walked away. Grace did not remember walking out of the ballroom. She remembered the service corridor swallowing the music. She remembered the white hum of fluorescent lights. She remembered her own footsteps sounding too loud against the polished back hallway where no guest would ever take a photograph. Then she was in the locker room, staring at her reflection in a narrow metal mirror, and the woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and impossible. Her hair had loosened around her face. Her cheeks were pale. The place on her vest where her name tag had been looked strangely empty, like a small piece of herself had been removed and left behind under the chandeliers. She opened her locker and reached for her coat. Her hands were steady now, but that almost frightened her more than shaking would have. Shock could make a person very calm. She folded her black apron, set it on the bench, and changed out of her serving vest with the slow care of someone closing a door without slamming it. Outside the locker room, voices moved through the hallway in tight whispers. Staff members were talking. Some sounded stunned. Some sounded relieved. One woman was crying softly, not from sadness exactly, but from years of holding something in and suddenly having no place left to put it. Grace wanted to go to them. She wanted to say, "We are all still here. We all saw it." But she could not be anyone's symbol tonight. She was too tired to become brave for other people all over again. When she stepped into the employee exit, the night air hit her face cold and clean. The rain had slowed to a silver mist. Downtown Manhattan gleamed around her, all taxi lights and wet pavement. The city pretending nothing important had happened inside one hotel ballroom. Grace wrapped her coat tighter and started walking toward the subway. She had $23 in her checking account, an apartment payment due in less than a week, and no idea whether she still had a job. But the thing that hurt most was not fear. It was embarrassment. Not because of the accusation. She knew she had done nothing wrong. It was the memory of herself trusting him in fragments, handing him a towel, eating beside him, telling him about her mother, asking if rich people knew how lonely they looked. All while he stood there with the answer hidden behind his eyes. By the time she reached Fulton Street, it was past midnight. Her building was old brick, wedged between a laundromat and a closed nail salon. with a front door that stuck unless you pulled it hard and lifted at the same time. Grace climbed 4 flights because the elevator had been out for 3 months. Inside her apartment, everything was exactly as she had left it. The radiator clicked near the window. Her mother's blue mug sat beside the sink. A stack of unopened bills waited on the table beneath a magnet from Coney Island, faded at the edges. Grace stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she locked the door, slid down against it, and finally let herself cry. Quietly. Not beautifully. Not dramatically. Just the kind of crying that comes when a person has been strong for too many hours and the body refuses one more minute of pretending. Across town, Ethan Whitmore remained in the ballroom long after the guests were gone. The flowers were wilting. Half-empty glasses stood abandoned on white tablecloths. The stage screen was dark now, but he could still see the footage in his mind. Vanessa's hand slipping the bracelet into Grace's apron. Grace's face when she realized no one believed her. Grace stepping away from him, as if his name had become another chandelier, too heavy with light. The general manager hovered nearby with a legal folder and a face full of panic. Mr. Whitmore, Public Relations is drafting a statement. We can frame tonight as decisive leadership. Ethan looked at him. Do not frame it. The man blinked. Sir, tell the truth. All of it, especially the part where we failed them. The manager swallowed. Yes, sir. Ethan walked to the table where Grace had left her apron and broken name tag. The apron had already been cleared by staff, but the tag remained beside a folded napkin, small and plain under the remains of a $100,000 event. Grace Bennett. The repaired clip still held. Ethan picked it up carefully. The plastic crack ran through the corner, but not through her name. He stood there for a long time, holding the smallest object in the room as if it weighed more than the hotel itself. He had come to Whitmore Grand pretending to be powerless because reports and spreadsheets had not shown him enough. He had wanted the truth unfiltered. He had wanted proof strong enough to tear out the rot. And he had found it. But Grace was right. He had watched. He had called it investigation when part of it had been hesitation. He had told himself timing mattered, evidence mattered, legal procedure mattered. All true, and still not enough. Because while he was building a case, Grace had been standing alone in the fire. At 2 a.m, Ethan went to the staff break room. The vending machines hummed. The bench where they had sat still held a crumb from her sandwich. On the bulletin board were old schedules, safety notices, and a faded staff appreciation flyer from last year, showing smiling executives shaking hands with employees whose names were printed too small to read. Ethan pulled it down, not in anger, in shame. By sunrise, the first changes had begun. Not announcements. Actions. Payroll auditors arrived before breakfast. Human Resources opened private interviews for every department. Security badges connected to Vanessa's office were disabled. Staff tips from the last 18 months were frozen for review. The hotel's legal team received one instruction in writing. Repay first, defend later. At 8:15, Ethan stood in the housekeeping floor office with a tray of coffee cups he had carried himself from the employee cafeteria. The housekeepers stared at him as if a marble statue had started apologizing. He did not ask them to be impressed. He did not give a speech about family or values. He simply said, "My name is Ethan Whitmore. This hotel carries my name, so its failures carry my name too. I am sorry. I am here to listen, and no one will be punished for telling the truth." At first, nobody spoke. Then an older woman named Rosa lifted her hand, slowly, like she was still waiting to be corrected for taking up space. "Will this be like last time?" she asked. "When we talk and nothing changes?" Ethan felt the question land exactly where it should. "No," he said. "This time, I signed the checks myself." By noon, Grace's phone had 17 missed calls. 3 from numbers she did not know. 2 from coworkers. 1 from Human Resources. 11 from a private number she refused to answer. She sat at her kitchen table in a sweater and jeans, staring at the landlord's final notice. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair was tied back. She had not slept. When another call came through from the private number, she let it ring until it stopped. A minute later, a text appeared. "This is Ethan. I will not ask you to answer. Your job is secure. Your back pay and tips are being reviewed. Vanessa is gone. Mr. Langford is gone. None of that repairs what I did. I know that. There will be a staff meeting tomorrow at 10 in the morning. You do not owe me attendance, forgiveness, or conversation. I only wanted you to know the truth before hearing it from anyone else. Grace read the message twice. Then she set the phone face down beside her mother's blue mug. Outside, traffic moved through wet streets. The city kept going, as it always did. But for the first time since leaving the ballroom, Grace felt something shift beneath the anger. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Not yet. Just the faint, dangerous possibility that Ethan Whitmore was finally doing the one thing powerful people almost never did after being exposed. He was not asking the world to forget. He was beginning with the damage. Grace did not go to the staff meeting because Ethan asked. She went because Rosa from housekeeping called at 9:22 and said, "Baby, I think you should see this with your own eyes." That was the only reason Grace put on her black coat, tied her hair back, and took the subway downtown with her stomach tight enough to make coffee feel like a mistake. Whitmore Grand looked different in daylight. Less magical, less dangerous. The marbles still shone, the doorman still wore white gloves, and the brass letters above the entrance still caught the morning sun, but Grace could no longer see the hotel as a place that towered over her. She had seen too much of its wiring. She entered through the staff door, not the lobby, because habit is hard to unlearn. The back corridor smelled like detergent, coffee, and fresh paint. Someone had already removed Vanessa's framed event awards from the office wall. Her nameplate was gone too, leaving a pale rectangle where it had hung for years. Small absence, large meaning. In the employee cafeteria, more than 80 staff members had gathered. Housekeepers in gray uniforms, cooks in white jackets, servers in black, maintenance workers, front desk agents, security officers, dishwashers, banquet captains, laundry staff. People who usually passed each other in hurried silence now stood shoulder to shoulder, holding paper cups, whispering, waiting. Grace slipped in near the back, hoping not to be noticed. That lasted 3 seconds. Rosa saw her first and opened her arms. Grace stepped into the hug before she could think better of it. Rosa smelled like hand cream and clean sheets. "You stood up for all of us," Rosa whispered. Grace closed her eyes. "I was terrified." "Of course you were. Courage usually is." Before Grace could answer, the room quieted. Ethan walked in without an entourage. No tuxedo, no stage lighting, no dramatic entrance. He wore a navy suit, no tie, and carried a plain folder under one arm. The repaired name tag was not in his hand, but Grace somehow felt it in the room anyway, like a question not yet answered. He stopped at the front, near the vending machines, the same machines that had hummed beside them the night before. He looked tired. Not polished tired. Human tired. "Thank you for coming," he said. No microphone. He did not need one. "I will be brief, because most of you have work to do, and because you have heard enough speeches from people who were not listening." A murmur moved through the room. Ethan opened the folder. As of this morning, all current staff disciplinary notes connected to Vanessa Clark are under review. Any record found to be retaliatory will be removed. Back pay, unpaid overtime, and withheld tips will be audited going back 18 months. The first repayments will be issued within 10 business days. A new employee protection line opens today. It will not report to hotel management. It will report directly to an outside labor firm and to my office. He looked up. And beginning next month, Whitmore Grand will establish the Bennett Fund, a staff emergency assistance program for rent, medical bills, transportation, and family emergencies. Grace stopped breathing for half a second. Around her, heads turned. Rosa squeezed her hand. Ethan did not look at Grace right away. Maybe on purpose. Maybe to give her the dignity of not being displayed. "It is named for Diane Bennett," he continued, "who worked in housekeeping here for 18 years. I read her file this morning. Attendance nearly perfect. Guest compliments consistent. Promotions denied 4 times with no documented explanation. When she became ill, no emergency support existed for her. That failure belongs to this company. It should not have taken her daughter being humiliated in my ballroom for me to learn her name." The room was silent now, but not like the ballroom. This silence was alive. Grace pressed her fingers to her mouth, trying to hold herself together. Nobody at the hotel had said her mother's full name out loud in years. Diane Bennett had been a line in an old employee database, a badge number, a woman who cleaned rooms until her body gave out. Now every person in the cafeteria knew she had mattered. Ethan closed the folder. "I cannot undo what this place took from many of you. I can only begin changing what it gives from this point forward." And I can promise you this. No guest, donor, manager, or executive will ever again be protected at the expense of an employee's dignity. If that promise fails, the failure is mine. He stepped back. No applause followed at first. People did not trust that easily. Grace respected that. Then Rosa began clapping, slow and firm. One housekeeper joined, then a cook, then a dishwasher. Soon the room filled with applause that sounded nothing like Gala applause. It was not polished. It was not polite. It was rough, uneven, and real. Ethan accepted it with his head slightly lowered, not smiling as if he had won something, but standing still as if he understood applause was not forgiveness. After the meeting, employees gathered around payroll auditors and human resources representatives. Rosa was pulled into a conversation with two younger housekeepers. Grace slipped out into the corridor, needing air. She made it as far as the old service stairwell before Ethan's voice reached her, soft and careful. Grace. She stopped with one hand on the railing. For a second, she considered walking away. She had earned that right. Instead, she turned. Ethan stood several feet back, giving her space. In his hand was the name tag. The crack was still visible, but the cheap plastic had been set into a thin brushed silver frame, simple and strong. Not jewelry, not decoration, a repair. I should have asked before using your mother's name, he said. Grace looked at the tag, then at him. Yes, you should have. He nodded once. I am sorry. I wanted the fund to honor her, but I should have spoken to you first. You keep doing that, Grace said, making decisions and apologizing after. The words hit him. She saw it. Good. I know. Do you? Her voice trembled, but she did not soften it. Because last night you watched me become evidence. Today my mother became a symbol. You may be trying to fix things, Ethan, but people are not tools you pick up when you need to prove a point. He closed his hand around the name tag, not hiding it, just holding it tighter. You are right. I need more than that sentence. Then I will give you more than that sentence. He drew a slow breath. The fund will not launch under her name unless you approve it. If you do not, I will rename it. If you want no connection to it at all, I will remove every reference. The repayments are happening regardless. The protection line is happening regardless. The audits are happening regardless. Those are not gifts to you. They are obligations from me. Grace watched him carefully. This was not the man from the ballroom command voice. This was not Eli with the hidden eyes. This was someone learning, painfully late, how to stand without controlling the room. And my job, she asked. Yours if you want it. Gone if you do not. Paid either way through the review period. I do not want hush money. It is not hush money. It is the money this hotel should have paid you while asking for your loyalty and giving you none. She looked away. The stairwell smelled faintly of metal and lemon cleaner. Yesterday, she had stood here thinking he was a temporary worker with secrets. Now the secrets were gone, and somehow the man was harder to understand. Why did you really come undercover? She asked. Ethan looked down the corridor, where staff voices carried softly from the cafeteria. My father built this hotel. He believed luxury was a promise. I used to believe that too. But after he died, I expanded too fast. Too many properties. Too many layers of management. I read reports instead of walking floors. Then complaints started coming in, and every executive summary told me the same thing. Isolated incidents, difficult employees, demanding guests. I knew someone was lying. I just did not know how many people were paying for that lie. So you became Eli. Yes. And when you met me? Ethan's eyes returned to hers. I forgot the investigation for a moment. Then I used it as an excuse to stay near you. That was unfair. Grace did not expect the honesty to hurt more than the lie. But it did, because it reached the part of her that had liked him before she knew his name. I meant what I said, she whispered. I do not know you. He lifted the silver-framed name tag slightly. Then I will not ask you to. Not all at once. He set it carefully on the stair rail between them, not forcing it into her hand. This belongs to you. So does the choice of whether I ever get to speak to you again. Grace stared at her name. Not broken. Not erased. Repaired, but still marked by what had happened. She picked it up slowly. The silver was cool against her fingers. I will think about the fund, she said. Ethan nodded. Thank you. That is not forgiveness. I know. She started down the stairs, then paused. And Ethan? He looked at her. If you want to honor my mother, do not put her name on a wall first. Protect the women still cleaning the rooms. For the first time that morning, Something like hope moved across his face. Not happiness. Not relief. Hope with responsibility attached. "I will," he said. Grace left him in the stairwell with that promise hanging between them, small enough to doubt, strong enough to begin. 3 months later, the ballroom looked nothing like the place where Grace had almost lost her name. The chandeliers were still there, bright as captured stars. The marble still shone. The tall windows still reflected the city in long ribbons of gold and blue. But the room felt different because the people inside it were different. There were no donor tables this time. No velvet ropes around silent auction prizes. No guests snapping fingers for champagne. Instead, rows of chairs faced a simple stage, and every seat was filled by the people who actually kept Whitmore Grand alive. Housekeepers, cooks, servers, front desk agents, engineers, security officers, laundry staff, drivers, dishwashers, and their families. At the back of the room, a new wall had been unveiled that morning. Not marble, not gold. Warm wood, soft lighting, and simple black letters that read, "The Bennett House Staff Center, in honor of Diane Bennett and every unseen hand that made this hotel shine." Grace stood 10 feet away from it, unable to stop looking at her mother's name. She had said yes to the fund, only after 2 conditions. First, the staff committee would run it with real authority, not as decoration for executive pride. Second, Diane Bennett's name would never be used to make the company look generous while employees stayed afraid. Ethan had agreed before she finished the sentence. Then he had done something Grace had not expected. He stepped back, not disappeared, not performed humility for applause. Stepped back and let the workers design what they needed. Emergency rent assistance, childcare stipends, medical transportation, paid meal breaks, a quiet room for night shift staff, and a legal support line for wage questions. The first repayment checks had gone out 6 weeks earlier. Rosa cried when hers arrived, then pretended she had dust in both eyes. A dishwasher named Miguel used his back pay to fix his car, which meant he no longer spent 2 hours on buses after midnight. A front desk agent paid off a medical bill that had followed her for 2 years. Grace watched these things happen quietly, one by one, and something inside her began to loosen. Not because Ethan was perfect, because the changes did not stop when the headlines faded. Vanessa Clark's name was gone from the company directory. Mr. Langford's name had been removed from the old advisory wall. The new employee protection line had already led to policy changes in 2 other Whitmore hotels. And Ethan, true to his promise, walked floors now. Not with cameras, not with speeches. He sat in staff cafeterias. He asked questions. He listened when answers made him uncomfortable. Grace had returned to work after 2 weeks, but not to the same role. She became part of the staff council first, then accepted a position helping design employee support programs across the New York properties. She did not accept it because Ethan offered. She accepted because Rosa said, "If someone finally opened the door, baby, walk through it and hold it open for the rest of us." Grace still lived on Fulton Street. The landlord had been paid. Her mother's blue mug still sat by the sink. But now, when Grace came home, the apartment no longer felt like the last room before losing everything. It felt like a place she had chosen to keep. At the dedication ceremony, Ethan stood at the microphone, but only after Rosa, Miguel, and 3 other staff members had spoken. He wore a charcoal suit, plain tie, and the same quiet expression Grace had learned to read better than any headline. "I thought leadership meant carrying the weight at the top," he said, looking out at the room. "I was wrong. Leadership means making sure the people carrying the weight below you are never crushed by it." The room stayed quiet, listening. 3 months ago, many people in this hotel bowed to me because of my title. That night should have made me proud. Instead, it taught me how empty power is when it only protects itself. His eyes found Grace, but he did not hold her there for the crowd. He looked back to the employees. "The person who taught me that is not powerful because of money, position, or a last name. She is powerful because she told the truth when silence would have been safer. Today, this center belongs to all of you. And if I ever forget that, I expect you to remind me." This time, the applause came easily. Grace clapped too, slower than the others, feeling the moment move through her in waves. After the ceremony, people gathered around the new center. There was coffee, sandwiches, sheet cake, and paper plates stacked beside flowers Diane Bennett would have called practical and pretty. Grace found herself near the service stairwell, The same one where she had once questioned a man named Eli and received half an answer. Ethan approached with 2 cups of coffee, stopping a respectful distance away. "Cream, no sugar," he said, offering one. Grace took it. "You remembered." "I remember most things you say." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "That sounds dangerous for both of us." He smiled softly, not the controlled smile of a chief executive officer. The real one, the one that had almost appeared in the rain. Probably. For a moment, they stood side by side, watching Rosa laugh with the kitchen staff near the cake table. The repaired name tag rested in Grace's coat pocket. She carried it sometimes, not because she needed proof of what happened, but because it reminded her that repaired did not mean untouched. It meant strong enough to keep going. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed the white towel from that first night, folded neatly, the silver W still visible in the corner. Grace stared at it. "You kept that. You gave it to me when you thought I was nobody. You were not exactly honest." "No," he said. "I was not." No defense. No speech. Just the truth. The only apology that still mattered because it kept showing up as action. Ethan unfolded the towel. Inside was not a diamond ring, not a grand romantic gesture too heavy for the moment, but a small brass key with a blue ribbon tied through it. Grace looked at him, confused. "What is this?" "The key to the staff center," he said. "The first official copy. The council voted for you to have it." Grace blinked, surprised by the sting in her eyes. "The council?" Rosa was very firm. Grace laughed, and the sound came out warmer than she expected. Ethan's expression softened, but he did not reach for her. He had learned that love, like trust, could not be taken just because someone finally deserved to ask. "There is something else," he said. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Careful. Not a decision. A question." She waited. The ballroom noise faded behind them, soft and distant. "Would you have dinner with me this weekend? Not as an apology. Not as your boss. Not as a man trying to fix everything with one evening. Just as Ethan, asking Grace." The simplicity of it unsettled her more than any grand speech could have. Grace looked toward the wall where her mother's name glowed under warm light. She thought of Diane's tired hands, her lavender soap, her voice saying beauty is not the enemy, cruelty is. She thought of the night in the rain, the broken name tag, the accusation, the walk home, the tears on her apartment floor. She thought of the months after, the repayments, the changed policies, the staff who finally spoke without whispering. Ethan had not erased the hurt. He had not bought forgiveness. He had built proof, day after day, that he understood power was not a throne. It was a responsibility. Grace took the brass key from the towel, closing her fingers around it. "Dinner," she said. "One dinner." Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "One dinner. And if you ever lie to me again, I walk." "You should." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw both men at once. Eli in the rain, Ethan under the chandeliers. The hidden man and the revealed one. The mistake and the repair. "I thought you were just some guy who needed help," she said. His voice softened. "I was." Grace tilted her head. "You own the hotel. And still needed help." That answer stayed with her. Later, when the crowd began to leave and the staff center lights glowed gently against the wood wall, Ethan did something no one expected. He stepped onto the small stage again, not to speak, but to help fold chairs. A few employees froze, unsure whether to stop him. Grace watched him lift one chair, then another, slightly awkward at first, but sincere. Rosa shook her head and muttered, "About time." Grace laughed. Ethan looked over, caught her smile, and for once did not seem like a man people had to bow to. He seemed like a man learning where to stand. Months ago, everyone had lowered their heads because of his name. Tonight, he lowered his own hands to serve the people who had built the shine around him. And Grace, holding the key to a room that would help others stay standing, understood the truth her mother had tried to teach her all along. Wealth could open doors. Power could command rooms. But kindness, when it finally became action, could rebuild a home.